Did modern horror fans crown the wrong masterpieces? Some of the century's most disturbing films were buried under louder franchises, cheaper jump scares, and studio hype machines that told audiences where to look. This list digs into the nightmares that slip through the cracks, films too strange, too cruel, or too quiet to become mainstream. And by the end, one forgotten title may look scarier than the classics everyone keeps praising. Number 20. The Hallow, 2015. Some forests do not feel haunted. They feel occupied. The Hallow takes that old childhood fear of the woods and turns it into something raw, wet, ancient, and angry. Directed by Corin Hardy, the film follows a conservationist and his family after they move near a remote Irish forest, only to discover that the locals are not simply superstitious. What makes this one underrated is not just the creature feature setup, but the atmosphere pressing down on every frame. The house feels unsafe, the trees feel watchful, and the folklore never feels like decoration. It feels like a warning nobody wanted to hear. While bigger horror films were selling clean jump scares, The Hallow leaned into mud, rot, practical terror, and a strange fairy tale cruelty. It is not trying to be polished or glamorous. It wants to feel infected. That is why it sticks. The movie understands that the scariest monsters are not always demons from hell. Sometimes they are the things humans disturbed because they thought the old stories were harmless. Number 19. Afflicted, 2013. A vacation video should never look like evidence. Afflicted begins with the energy of a travel diary, the kind of found footage setup viewers think they already understand, then quietly turns into a body horror nightmare with a surprisingly clever bite. The story follows two friends documenting their trip across the world, but after a mysterious encounter, one of them begins changing in ways that are impossible to explain and even harder to control. What makes Afflicted work is how it takes a familiar monster myth and treats it almost like a medical disaster. The camera is not just recording scares, it is recording denial, panic, and the terrifying discovery that your own body has become the enemy. Derek Lee and Cliff Prowse give the film an intimate, personal edge because the friendship at the center makes the horror feel more desperate. It is fast, physical, and more inventive than many bigger studio horror releases. Its underrated power comes from one simple idea. What if becoming powerful did not feel like freedom, but like a disease you could not confess? Number 18. Dead End, 2003. The road looks empty, but that is exactly why it feels wrong. Dead End is the kind of horror movie that proves a small budget can become a trap if the idea is sharp enough. A family takes a shortcut on Christmas Eve, and what begins as a tense drive slowly becomes a looping nightmare where the road refuses to end. The genius of the film is its simplicity. No giant mythology, no over-explained monster, just headlights, trees, family arguments, and the growing suspicion that something has already gone terribly wrong. Ray Wise and Lynn Shaye help give the story a strange, darkly comic edge, but the dread never fully lets up. Every stop on the road feels like another piece of a puzzle the characters may not survive long enough to solve. Dead End is underrated because it knows exactly what kind of fear it is using, the fear of being trapped in motion. You are moving forward, but somehow getting nowhere. That is a nightmare almost anyone can understand. Number 17. Late Phases, 2014. The monster is dangerous, but the old man waiting for it is even more interesting. Late Phases takes the werewolf movie, one of horror's most exhausted subgenres, and gives it a bruised, human soul. The story follows a blind war veteran who moves into a retirement community and quickly realizes that the brutal deaths around him are not random animal attacks. What makes the film stand out is its refusal to treat age, disability, or loneliness as background details. They become part of the tension. This is not about helpless victims waiting for rescue. It is about a stubborn man preparing for war against something everyone else refuses to believe exists. The creature effects are old school, the setting is unusual, and the emotional weight gives the movie more bite than expected. Late Phases did not become a mainstream horror favorite, but it deserves more attention because it understands the werewolf myth as more than transformation. It is about survival, rage, and the terrifying moment when nobody believes you until the claws are already at the door. Number 16. The Midnight Meat Train, 2008. The subway has always felt a little haunted, but this movie makes it feel hungry. The Midnight Meat Train is a grim, stylish horror film adapted from Clive Barker's work, and it carries that Barker signature. Urban life hiding something ancient, grotesque, and almost ceremonial underneath. Bradley Cooper plays a photographer, drawn into a series of disappearances connected to a silent, brutal figure moving through the late-night train system. What makes the film so underrated is how confidently it builds a secret world beneath ordinary routine. The city is not just a location. It becomes a machine that feeds on people nobody notices. Vinnie Jones gives the central threat a cold, wordless presence, making him feel less like a regular killer and more like an employee of something much older. The film is slick, violent, strange, and more ambitious than its reputation suggests. It was never treated like the horror gem it could have been. But beneath the blood and metal is a chilling idea. Every city has tunnels, and not all of them were built for passengers. Number 15. Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, 2006. This is what happens when a slasher villain knows he is in a slasher movie. Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon is one of the smartest horror comedy hybrids of the century, because it treats iconic killers like professionals with a craft, a plan, and a legacy to protect. The film follows a documentary crew shadowing Leslie Vernon, a man preparing to become the next great masked murderer in a world where slasher legends are treated almost like historical figures. The concept sounds playful, but the cleverness is sharper than the jokes. It breaks down the mechanics of horror scenes, explains how victims are manipulated, and turns the familiar rules of the genre into something weirdly believable. Then, when the tone shifts, the movie reminds you that all that cleverness still leads to real danger. It is underrated because it arrived before meta-horror became fashionable again, and it understood fan culture with eerie accuracy. This film did not mock slashers because it hated them. It dissected them because it loved them too much. Number 14. The Sacrament, 2013. The scariest cult stories are not scary because they are impossible. They are scary because history already proved they can happen. The Sacrament, directed by Ty West, uses a documentary-style approach to follow journalists visiting a remote religious community led by a charming but deeply unsettling figure known as Father. The film is clearly inspired by real-world cult tragedy, and that shadow gives every calm conversation a pulse of dread. Unlike supernatural horror, this movie does not need ghosts, curses, or monsters. Its horror comes from persuasion, control, isolation, and the awful realization that people can be led somewhere terrible while believing they are being saved. Gene Jones gives Father a soft-spoken menace that feels far more dangerous than screaming villainy. The Sacrament is underrated because it is not built around cheap shock. It is built around inevitability. You watch the smiles, the speeches, the community rituals, and slowly understand that the trap has already closed. By the end, the film's most disturbing question is not how people followed him. It is how easily they wanted to believe. Number 13. Goodnight Mommy, 2014. A bandaged face should mean healing, but here it feels like a disguise. Goodnight Mommy is a cold, controlled Austrian nightmare about twin boys who begin to suspect that the woman who returned from surgery may not really be their mother. That premise sounds simple, almost like an old campfire story, but the film turns it into something icy, elegant, and psychologically cruel. The house is bright, clean, and almost too quiet, which makes the tension feel even more suffocating. Instead of throwing noise at the viewer, the directors use silence, distance, and suspicion. Every glance becomes an accusation. Every maternal gesture feels rehearsed. The horror grows from a painfully intimate fear. What if the person who is supposed to protect you has become someone else? Or worse, what if grief has made you see a monster where a human being still stands? Goodnight Mommy is underrated because it understands that family horror does not need a haunted house. Sometimes the family is the haunting, and love becomes the most dangerous room in the home. Number 12. Inside, 2007. Some home invasion films knock on the door. Inside kicks the door off its hinges. This French horror film is one of the most intense entries from the new French extremity movement, and it is not designed to comfort casual viewers. The setup is brutally simple. A pregnant widow is alone at home when a mysterious woman arrives with a terrifying obsession. From there, the film becomes a relentless pressure cooker of grief, invasion, survival, and bodily fear. What makes Inside so unforgettable is not just its violence, but its commitment to emotional panic. The house becomes a battlefield, the night feels endless, and the intruder is not a random threat, but a force of pure obsession. Beatrice Dahl gives the film a chilling, almost mythic presence, turning the stranger into something between a villain and a nightmare figure. Inside is underrated in wider mainstream horror discussions because it is too harsh for easy recommendation. But for serious horror fans, it remains a landmark of fearless filmmaking. Its final impact is savage. Safety is an illusion, even behind your own locked door. Number 11. Trick or Treat, 2007. Halloween has rules, and this movie punishes anyone foolish enough to break them. Trick or Treat is one of the rare horror anthologies that feels like a complete mythology rather than a collection of random stories. Directed by Michael Dougherty, it weaves together multiple Halloween night tales involving school legends, masked traditions, neighborhood secrets, and the unforgettable little figure known as Sam. What makes the film so beloved among horror fans is its perfect seasonal texture. The orange glow, the costumes, the streets, the candy, the whispered rules. Everything feels like the dark side of childhood Halloween memories. Yet it remained underrated for years because it did not get the immediate theatrical spotlight it deserved. That delay almost helped build its cult reputation, turning it into the kind of movie horror fans recommended like a secret handshake. It is playful, nasty, stylish, and surprisingly tight in how its stories connect. Trick or Treat earns its place because it understands Halloween better than most films. It is not just a date on the calendar. It is a ritual, and rituals demand respect. Number 10. Southbound, 2015. The highway does not lead anywhere. It circles back to guilt. Southbound is an anthology horror film that feels less like separate stories and more like one long, cursed road trip through punishment, regret, and supernatural judgment. Set along a lonely desert highway, the film links together tales of travelers, strangers, accidents, rituals, and impossible choices. What makes it underrated is the way it uses motion as a trap. Cars keep driving, people keep running, doors keep opening, but escape never feels real. The desert setting gives everything a purgatory-like emptiness, as if the characters are already halfway between life and something worse. Unlike many anthologies, Southbound has a consistent mood: grim, dusty, feverish, and doomed. Its segments vary, but the overall feeling is impressively unified. The film also benefits from the creative fingerprints of several modern horror voices, including filmmakers connected to the found footage and anthology revival. Southbound deserves more attention because it turns the open road into a closed room. Its horror is not about getting lost. It is about realizing the road knew your destination before you did. Number 9. Starry Eyes, 2014. Hollywood does not kill dreams quickly. It teaches them to bleed slowly. Starry Eyes is one of the nastiest modern horror films about ambition because it understands that fame is not always a reward. Sometimes it is a possession. The story follows Sarah, a struggling actress trapped in the humiliating machinery of auditions, dead-end work, fake encouragement, and quiet desperation. She wants to be seen so badly that when a strange opportunity appears, it does not feel like danger at first. It feels like the door finally opening. That is what makes the film so disturbing. It does not treat evil as something that attacks from outside. It suggests that the hunger for success can invite the monster in. Directed by Kevin Kulsh and Dennis Widmeyer, the film mixes body horror, occult dread, and industry satire without becoming cartoonish. The Los Angeles setting feels cold, predatory, and spiritually empty, where everyone is smiling while silently calculating who can be used next. Alex Esso's performance gives the movie its tragic sting because Sarah is not simply foolish. She is exhausted, overlooked, and desperate to matter. Starry Eyes is underrated because it turns the casting room into a ritual chamber. Its final punch is cruel but unforgettable. In a city built on transformation, the scariest makeover is the one that costs you your soul. Number 8. The House of the Devil, 2009. The most dangerous horror movie is sometimes the one that refuses to hurry. The House of the Devil is a slow-burn nightmare, built on patience, silence, and the unbearable feeling that something evil is waiting just outside the frame. Directed by Ty West, the film follows a college student who accepts a suspicious babysitting job at a remote house, only to discover that the situation is far stranger than she was told. What makes the movie special is its devotion to atmosphere. It does not beg for attention with constant shocks. It lets the viewer sit inside the house, listen to the quiet, watch the empty rooms, and feel the trap closing one ordinary detail at a time. The film channels satanic panic-era horror without feeling like a cheap imitation. The clothes, music, camera movement, and pacing all create the sensation of finding a cursed VHS tape in someone's basement. Jocelyn Donahue gives the story a grounded vulnerability, making every choice feel human rather than foolish. The brilliance is that the audience knows something is wrong long before the character fully understands it, and that gap becomes torture. The House of the Devil remains underrated because it trusts dread more than noise. Some movies scare you by showing the devil, but this one scares you by making you wait for him. Number 7. Hell House LLC, 2015. A fake haunted house should be safe because everyone knows the scares are staged. That is exactly why Hell House LLC works so well. It takes a setting built for artificial fear and slowly reveals that something real has been hiding among the props. The film uses a documentary and found footage structure to investigate a tragedy inside a Halloween attraction, set up in an abandoned hotel. On paper, the concept sounds familiar, but the execution is what makes it a cult favorite. The camera catches small wrong details, figures that seem to move, empty corners that suddenly feel occupied, and decorations that no longer look like decorations. Instead of relying only on loud jumps, the film creates a sickening suspicion that the crew is being watched by something patient. The abandoned hotel becomes more than a location. It feels like a building with memory, appetite, and a cruel sense of timing. What makes Hell House LLC underrated is how much it accomplishes with limited resources. It understands that found footage is most effective when the viewer starts scanning the background instead of the main action. Every hallway becomes a question. Every clown mask becomes a threat. The film's real strength is its simplicity. It reminds horror fans that the scariest prop in the room is the one you swear was somewhere else a minute ago. Number 6. The Devil's Candy, 2015. Some horror films whisper evil. The Devil's Candy cranks it through an amplifier. This is a lean, furious, heavy metal nightmare about art, family, possession, and the terrifying possibility that inspiration can come from somewhere rotten. What makes the film hit harder than expected is the emotional core. This is not just another haunted house story where a family ignores warning signs. The bond between father, mother, and daughter feels warm enough that the threat actually matters. Sean Byrne directs the movie with a sweaty, electric intensity, making the supernatural elements feel tied to addiction, obsession, and creative hunger. The villain is not presented as a stylish mastermind, but as something damaged, frightening, and horribly human. That choice gives the film a grimy realism beneath the occult imagery. The Devil's Candy is underrated because it moves fast, wastes nothing, and still leaves a bruise. It understands that evil is not always quiet and elegant. Sometimes it is loud, desperate, and pounding at the walls. Its final message lands like a warning. When the devil offers you a gift, he usually sends the bill to someone you love. Number 5. The Autopsy of Jane Doe, 2016. The body never moves, and that is what makes it terrifying. The Autopsy of Jane Doe turns one corpse, one basement, and one long night into a masterclass in controlled dread. The story follows a father and son working as coroners who are asked to examine an unidentified young woman discovered under deeply disturbing circumstances. At first, the horror is clinical. They search for causes, injuries, evidence, and explanations. But every new discovery makes less sense than the last, and the room slowly shifts from workplace to trap. What makes the film so effective is how it weaponizes procedure. Every incision, every observation, every strange internal clue becomes another step toward something ancient and impossible. Brian Cox and Emile Hirsch give the movie a human weight, especially because their relationship carries grief and tension long before the supernatural terror fully arrives. Directed by André Avredal, the film uses space brilliantly. The morgue is narrow, cold, and sealed off from the world, making every sound feel personal. The horror does not need a giant mythology dump. It lets the audience feel the awful truth forming piece by piece. The autopsy of Jane Doe is underrated because it turns investigation into damnation. The more the characters learn, the less chance they have. That is the cruelest kind of mystery, is one where solving it may be the thing that kills you. Number 4. Creep, 2014. The scariest mask in this movie is a friendly smile. Creep is one of the most uncomfortable horror films of the modern era because it understands awkwardness as a weapon. The setup is almost painfully simple. A videographer accepts a job filming a strange man who claims he wants to record personal messages before he dies. At first, the situation feels weird but manageable. Then the strange behavior keeps escalating, and the viewer is forced into the same emotional trap as the cameraman. When does politeness become dangerous? Patrick Bryce directs with a stripped-down approach that makes every interaction feel too close. Mark Duplass gives a performance that is funny, sad, needy, and frightening all at once, which is why the film is so hard to shake off. He does not play the threat like a traditional monster. He plays him like someone who knows exactly how social pressure works. The horror comes from hesitation. The character should leave, but leaving feels rude, paranoid, or premature. Number 3. Kill List, 2011. This movie does not change genres. It drags you into a nightmare before you realize the floor has disappeared. Kill List begins like a bleak crime thriller about financial pressure, domestic tension, and two former soldiers taking a dangerous job. Then, scene by scene, it mutates into something far stranger and more horrifying. Ben Wheatley's film is difficult to categorize, and that is exactly why it deserves its high place on this list. It uses the language of hitman drama, kitchen sink realism, psychological breakdown, and folk horror, then blends them into a story that feels cursed from the inside. The violence is shocking, but the real disturbance comes from the atmosphere of unseen design. The characters think they are accepting assignments. The viewer slowly suspects they are being guided through a ritual. Neil Maskell's performance gives the film its unstable heartbeat, shifting between wounded husband, angry father, and man unraveling under forces he does not understand. Kill List is underrated because it refuses the comfort of clean explanation. It gives enough clues to make the horror feel deliberate, but not enough to make it safe. By the time the ending arrives, the movie has become something much darker than a crime story. The most terrifying contract is not the one you sign. It is the one written for you before you even arrive. Number 2. The Eyes of My Mother, 2016. Some nightmares do not scream. They stare back in black and white. The Eyes of My Mother is a quiet, elegant, deeply unsettling horror film that feels like a damaged photograph found in a locked drawer. Directed by Nicolas Pesce, the story follows Francisca, a young woman shaped by isolation, trauma, and a childhood encounter that permanently distorts her understanding of love, pain, and connection. The film's power comes from restraint. It does not chase constant shocks or explain every psychological crack. Instead, it observes a lonely life, turning monstrous, with the cold patience of a funeral portrait. The black and white cinematography makes the rural setting feel timeless, almost as if the story could belong to any decade where silence was allowed to hide cruelty. Kika Magalhães gives Francisca a haunting stillness, making her frightening not because she behaves like a traditional villain, but because she seems to have built her own emotional language outside normal human boundaries. The film is underrated because it is too artful for casual shock audiences, and too disturbing for viewers expecting safe art house mood. It exists in a cruel middle space, beautiful and horrifying at the same time. What makes it unforgettable is the sadness underneath the terror. The Eyes of My Mother suggests that monsters are not always born from evil. Sometimes they are created when loneliness is left alone long enough to become a religion. Number 1. Lake Mungo, 2008. The ghost is not the scariest thing in Lake Mungo. The scariest thing is what a family might never know about someone they loved. This Australian mockumentary is one of the most quietly devastating horror films of the century, because it treats the supernatural not as a spectacle, but as an extension of grief. The story follows a family trying to understand strange events after the death of their teenage daughter, Alice. Through interviews, photographs, videos, and painful revelations, the film slowly turns mourning into investigation. What makes Lake Mungo so powerful is its realism. It does not feel like a movie trying to scare you every minute. It feels like a documentary you found late at night, one that becomes more disturbing because everyone in it seems genuinely broken. The horror hides inside ordinary images, a blurry background, a recovered recording, a secret left behind. Joel Anderson's direction is patient and emotionally ruthless, allowing the mystery to unfold like a wound reopening. The film is underrated because it does not deliver horror in the usual way. It does not attack the viewer. It waits for the viewer to lean closer. And when the truth finally surfaces, it does something rare. It makes the ghost story feel tragically human. Lake Mungo earns the #1 spot because it understands that the deepest hauntings are not always about the dead returning. Sometimes, they are about realizing the living never truly saw them. So maybe the real horror classics were never the loudest ones. They were the films hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right viewer to discover them. Which one disturbed you the most, and which underrated nightmare deserves a place on this list? Drop your pick below, because the next forgotten horror masterpiece might be the one everyone ignored.